So welcome to this last session. Again, it's about finding, eliminating, and avoiding errors in design control documentation. My name is Karl Larsson. I work at Aligned. We are hosting this seminar. Aligned is providing a medical device design control management software, and you're going to be able to get a closer look at it throughout this presentation. So let me start out. If you are developing a medical device, you are probably faced with a lot of documentation tasks. And according to our measurements, up to 30% of the total development effort can be about documentation, activities, and we're creating a lot of documents, many documents. We're talking about meters of documents, hundreds of documents. And there's not only a lot of documents, there's also tend to be very interdependent, meaning that one document might refer to 5 documents and relate to information in those documents, meaning that if we start making changes to one of these documents, that might have a severe impact on other documents as well. So we need to be very strict when we make changes into our medical device development documentation, like our technical file or our DHF. So we make sure that all the documents are consistent. It's also the case that a single document lives throughout the development lifecycle of the device, and it may be updated by different people. So it is not necessarily the case that one document has one author and one owner, and he's going to sit on that document and control it throughout the development of the device. And we've already seen in the first presentation today that developing a medical device is a multiple year effort. And why are we writing all these documents? Well, there are, of course, underlying regulatory requirements that forces us to document these things. And last but not least, there is a tendency in a medical device development organization that everyone is participating in these documentation efforts. So it's not only specialized people that are working with documentation, but it's rather everybody's contributing to this documentation more or less. So if these documents turn out to be erroneous, what are the consequences? Well, we might run into failed audits, we might receive warnings letters, 483 observations. In the end, this is going to lead to increased cost and delayed market access. But for the people that really work with this, it's going to lead to more work, right? And that level of work, that matters to me. And I'm going to tell you a story about why this whole concept or this idea is very dear to me, because I started out as a medical device engineer back in the days. I was developing medical devices. And I was, of course, spending a lot of time with the documentation activities. And I did not necessarily enjoy that part of the development process. I thought I was hired to innovate, to deliver new, exciting medical devices. And then I spent a significant chunk of my workday fighting with Word, writing documents, updating documents, going through the release process and whatnot. And back in those days, we used Word, we used Excel, we had some requirement management systems. And of course, the documents that we produced were audited, as they should be. Now, the auditors kept finding errors in our documents. And of course, when they found it, we took it down, we corrected those, updated the documents, and then the next auditor came and he found other errors. So this tended to be like a continuous loop, like no matter how many times we updated and fixed those documents, the auditors kept finding new errors. And this, of course, had a detrimental effect on in the workplace. The confidence in our own documentation suffered, of course. So we ended up with having documents that we couldn't necessarily trust. If somebody asked us, is this free from errors? We couldn't really tell them. And what kind of errors did these auditors find then? Well, to some extent, there was inconsistent information, meaning that I had one document where I had made one update and I didn't realize that the information here in this document, say it was a specification, for example, had an impact on content in other documents, like the corresponding test case somewhere else. So by changing things in one place, the corresponding dependent document pieces didn't get updated, and we ended up in an inconsistent state. There were events of missing information. And there were several reasons why we could end up with missing information. Sometimes we just simply didn't know that we had to write down a particular piece of information. In other cases, we thought that we had written it down, but the thing that we had written down, the auditor just didn't agree with. So we claim that we have definitely entered this information, and the auditor says that that's not what I'm seeing here in this document. You have written something completely different. We also had occasions with outdated information, which meant that the real world had accelerated. So we had changes in the real world that was not necessarily reflected in the documentation. We had, of course, several occasions of formal errors, and these could be things like signatures were missing, dates of signatures were maybe in an order that the auditor did not agree with. Maybe we had a document and that document contained the version of the document, and maybe that version was written in several places of the document, for example, in the header, in the footer, on the front page, in the document change history, and in the file name. And maybe the person then that updated that document only updated the version number in 3 out of these 5 places, for example. And then last but not least, there were some occasions about insufficient justifications, because we learned this really early, that if you're claiming that some part of what's required to be written down is not applicable to your particular device, you need to justify that. It turned out there is a bit of an art to write a proper justification why something is not applicable. And in some cases, the reason for having these discrepancies was that although we kind of knew what we had to write down, we weren't necessarily informed about how to write it in an acceptable way. So there are, of course, known and proven ways to get a grip on these situations. First of all, training. Training is great. I think it might be even underused when addressing this particular problem, having errors in your design documentation. It's a great way to have experts telling you what you need to do. A bit of a problem is, of course, the timeliness of the training. You know that you get the best effects from training, that you start using the things that you have trained exactly right after you had taken the training. Now, this is not necessarily the way trainings are done in medical device manufacturing companies. The way I experience it is that when you start at the company, there is 2 weeks of trainings to teach you all the SOPs in order to get all those training certificates. And you go through that training period, but that does not necessarily mean that you're applying the thing that you learned during the training immediately after you learned it. So maybe your memory is fading and the thing that you trained there is something that you no longer remember. So one can talk about training in a push form. So what I describe now is training that are pushed onto the users, not when they need it, but when the trainer is available and so forth, versus a pull way of training where the user that needs information is acquiring the training for the correct purpose from the correct person at the time when he needs it. So training might definitely be a way of reducing the number of errors in documents, but it has, of course, its pros and cons. A second one is to provide well-structured Word templates. So many of the documents that we write, they do have a corresponding Word template within the organization, because the development process requires us to provide these documents, and a well thought through QMS should provide these templates. Now, templates may come in various degrees of quality, but there are some good benefits from taking your time and create well-structured Word templates for example, design control documents. And what I mean with well-structured Word templates is that they are explicitly constructed to avoid formal mistakes, and that it contains a thought-through structure, but a structure that is also flexible, so you can adapt that structure to your particular device. Maybe your Word template also contains some good example texts and instructions, maybe as hidden text and whatnot. And they are also based on a master style template that is used throughout the entire company. So you can really gain from having a well-structured Word templates. Now, it might be difficult for a startup to get to those templates, because the quality of a Word template tend to get better and better throughout the lifetime of the company. You realize that you've made mistakes. You realize that maybe you can mitigate it by updating your Word template, and that is then done over time. And of course, the value of these Word templates, these well-structured Word templates that you have put a lot of effort in, comes with repeated use. So if you're a startup, you're doing this for the first time, you're unsure if you're ever going to do another medical device, then getting to that well-structured Word template from the start, from starting with nothing, might be difficult. Maybe there are consultants out there that can help you with this. A third way has to do with example documents. And this, I'm mentioning this because I am doing this myself, and I know a lot of other people that do it. When they sit down and they should write a document, some people, they just sit down with Word and the document template and they start typing. There are other that do some research first. They call it research. So they go and look at similar documents. They go and look at what have other people written, and then they use the good old copy paste. So they copy something from an existing document, they paste it into their document, and they go from there. And so if we can assume that there's copy pasting is going to happen, maybe you can leverage it. So you could try to explicitly let the people know that we have good examples for these documents here and here. We did this project 2 years ago, and the documentation we did there was excellent, and it was well approved, and the auditors didn't find any errors. So we suggest that if you need inspiration, which is just another way of saying copy paste, you should go to those dedicated documents. Again, this is something that you might acquire over time. It's hard to get these kind of example documents if you start out as a startup and never have done this before. But this thing is actually then leveraging two things. So the one is the assumption that people are going to copy paste regardless. They're going to copy paste from somewhere. So you just as may try to get some control over that process. And the other thing is that you can then leverage mistakes that you've learned from within your company. So writing example documents or pointing out example documents of good quality might be something. And then last but not least, we have reviews and internal audits. So this is the bread and butter of controlling errors in design control documents, reviews. I am sure that all of you have participated in document reviews, and I'm sure that all of you knows the pros and cons of conducting reviews. They are, of course, resource intense, they are reactive, but they, of course, also have some benefits. Now, I want to go back to my story. I was working as a medical device development engineer, producing documents with low confidence because they turn out to have a lot of errors. So that's how we came up with Aligned Elements. And Aligned Elements is a product by Align, where I'm working today. And Aligned Elements is a design control management software. And the whole idea of aligned elements and what it's supposed to do comes from my experience or our experience here in the company from working with these medical device development documents. We wanted to create a software that makes the user spend less time on documentation and more time on innovation, because that's exactly what I wanted to do back then. And if possible, we want to prevent the errors that we know can occur from happening in the first place. And if there should be errors in those documents, we want to have measures to detect those errors automatically in order to reduce the risk of being non-compliance. Right? So that's the whole idea of aligned elements, to spend less time on documentation, preventing and detecting errors. And we do this on 4 different levels. The first thing that we realized was that the document itself might not be the optimal thing to deal with if we want to decrease errors. We need to change the nucleus of what we're dealing with. And we decided that the nucleus of the system should be the individual design control item. That single requirement or specification or risk or test or whatnot. So that's where we're starting out, with the design control item. And then we can combine this item in order to create a traceability. We can place these design control items into individual documents, and we can then compile a set of documents to create a technical file or a design history file. And we provide error checks and controls on all these different levels, from the individual design control item to the second level, where design control items interact through traceability, onto the third level, where we place design control items into documents in order to create documents, and on the fourth level, by analyzing a set of documents in a design history file, technical file context. And I'm going to go through some examples of the checks and controls that we perform in order to reduce errors from occurring and ways to detecting them. So starting out on the individual design control item level, for example, if we start with a single requirement or a single test case or a single risk, first thing we do is to ensure that all the changes that are made are controlled. So we will never ever again have the problem of not carefully tracking who made the change, when was it made, what was this made to, and why was it made. So this is automatically tracked. You never need to worry about that. That's always in there. Another thing we can check for is empty fields. And I'm sure that you have all been subjected to an auditor claiming, well, there is an empty cell here or an empty field. Did you forget to fill it out, or does it just mean that it's not applicable? So we can use our software to make sure that fields are not empty, that either the user has written something in those fields, or that we can provide a standard text or standard piece of information that goes in there in order to make sure that empty fields do not occur. We can also check for valid states, meaning that we let the software check if a risk is sufficiently mitigated, if a test is passed or failed, etc. We can also check for valid data combinations. That might be the case that if you answer if no to a question, then you need to fill out a justification clause for that. If you say yes, you need to spell out why that is the case. And in the end, we can let these error checks drive workflows, meaning that you're not allowed to execute a test case if the test case itself has not been properly reviewed. So we use these error checks to drive workflow and to prevent the user from ending up in an inconsistent state. So this is all checks that can be done on the first level, on the design control item level. Then we go to the second level, namely the one of traceability. So you know that traceability is a core process in medical device development when it comes to design control management. So there's going to be traces between items, and we can run a host of analysis on the way things are traced. We can look for missing traces. For example, a user need that doesn't have a trace to, for example, a system requirement. We can look for orphaned items. We can look for a verification test case that doesn't have an incoming trace. So what is it exactly testing? Why do we perform this test? We can look for unexpected traces. Maybe we don't expect particular traces to appear. Maybe we expect a user need to trace to a validation test case and not a verification test case. So these are things that can be done as well automatically with a click of a button. We can check for conditional states that if a design control is in a certain state, we expect a certain kind of trace. If it's in a different state, or is of a different flavor, we expect it to have a second set of traces. And of course, last but not least, the trace information that we have can automatically be generated into trace tables that are, of course, automatically analyzed and automatically updated as soon as any changes or corrections are made. And these are examples of checking, preventing errors from happening on level number 2, the interactions, the tracing between individual design control items. On number 3, we reach the level of documents because, of course, in the end, it is the documents that we produce that are going to be audited. But in the case of design control documentation, many of these documents will contain design control items, and we have a really great way of populating Word documents with design control item data from our system. Of course, these documents are then also controlled by aligned elements. That means that there is a single source of truth for each document. You don't have that requirement document lying around on 4 or 5 different places in your company network with different versions, and you're never really sure what is the current version of this document. Is it this one, or is it the one my friend Fred is having? There is a single source of truth here. Aligned elements can also check for outdated content. This is a bit more complex, but it can absolutely be done. So with a single click, the document is checked. Is there any outdated information in this document? If there is, you have the possibility to update the document to the most current state with a single click. We have also included the possibilities to perform reviews on this level, so items can be reviewed. And you can therefore be sure that the content that goes into these documents are of an appropriate state and that they have been reviewed. Of course, we integrate electronic signatures, so you can sign your documents electronically, and our checks, of course, and make sure that everybody that is supposed to have signed a particular document has actually done so. Otherwise, the red flashes are blinking, you get inconsistency messages, and you can then address these before the auditor shows up. So this is on the 3rd level. On the last level, we can look at the design history file or the technical file itself. So we will have a lot of documents that we expect to be available and ready at particular states of the project. So many medical device manufacturers have a development process that contains some kind of gates. And at each of these gates, the development process usually stipulates which kind of documents that ought to be available and in which state. So that's something that we can control in aligned elements as well. We can stipulate on milestone 2, we expect the following documents to be ready. Are they ready? That's the first check. The second check is if they exist, are they in the state that we expect them to be? So all in all, with these 4 levels, we kind of apply this Swiss cheese model of have different levels of control in order to catch as many problems and errors as we can. And the whole idea with this mechanism is then that you should spend less time with looking for errors, with correcting errors. This should free up resources within the organization to actually spend more time on innovation and development itself. So what are the takeaways from this presentation? I want to let you know that the documentation is a significant chunk of the development effort. It's a larger chunk than you might even think. So up to 30% of the total effort, of the total time and resources spent, is spent on documentation. And also note that the documentation errors are not equally distributed over all documents, over all situations. There is probably the case that you have errors that occur reoccurringly at particular states for particular documents, maybe for particular divisions. And you can make great benefits if you analyze in a structured way the documentation errors that appear in your organization and try to mitigate that. Now, trainings, document templates, example documents, and reviews, these are known methods that can reduce errors. They all come with work and cost, of course. And design control software is then, I think, a great complement that can provide automated ways to find and reduce errors. I think that you should give your development team the best possibilities to handle this task, and you can apply these different approaches as you see fit. I am, of course, biased here because I supply a design control management software with the intention of automatically find and reduce and prevent errors. You might say, well, isn't that very expensive? Doesn't come with a high cost. It does, but it also creates values, and you can avoid the costs then that are associated with finding and correcting errors in your design control documentation. If you are interested in finding out more about aligned elements and the modes in which aligned elements work in order to find and reduce and mitigate errors, then I'd be happy to demonstrate this to you. I've reached the end of my presentation, and I have a few messages in the chat. And I'll try to address them. The first one is Aligned Elements tool provided with the information and documents to be used for the software tool validation as required by ISO 13485? Yes, we provide Aligned Elements with a validation documentation kit that can be applied. Again, you can use it as, let's say, inspiration, or we can help you perform the validation, or third option, we can hook you up with somebody that can perform the validation for you. If you're interested in what these validation documents look like, I can send them to you. Just reach out to me. Question from Roman. Is it possible to define additional business rules in the software? If we talk about error checking rules, there is a catalog about 25 different error checking rules, and we are adding more rules all the time. It's up to each customer to select which of these rules that should be applied to which kind of design control times. And our customers are continuously giving us more tips on errors that they want to detect, and we are happy to help them out. Is there an audit trail or log? Absolutely. So all the changes made to all the data is carefully logged in an audit trail, so you never need to worry about that. And finally, is also the UE documentation included in the software? Now, I'm not 100% sure what you mean with the UE documentation. Maybe you want to elaborate on what that is. The usability engineering documentation. Yes, so the aligned elements is then configured to the quality management system and development process of each customer that chooses to apply it. And we do have usability engineering configuration set that is, as an example set, that can be applied, and that includes things like use scenarios, the risk management of use errors, heuristic walkthroughs, cognitive walkthroughs, heuristic evaluation, validation, etc. I'll be happy to demonstrate it to you if you are interested. Is Aligned Elements CFR Part 11 compliant towards FDA? Yes, it is set up to be compliant to the extent a a software product can be compliant, it comes with a pre-filled out CFR Part 11 assessment as part of the product package. And you can apply that. There are some additional things that needs to be filled out for by the organization that uses it. For example, how does the organization deal with an employee that ceased to work in this organization? But I'd say 85-90% of all the things are already covered by aligned elements, and I'll be happy to demonstrate that as well. Just reach out to me after this seminar. So that was the last of the 5 presentations of the 2021 Aligned Sharpen Your Skills seminar. Thank you very much for coming here today. As mentioned, all these recordings are going to be available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So you can go back and take a look at them again and use them as reference. And last but not least, I really, really encourage you to get in touch with our experts, connect with them on LinkedIn, reach out to them if you have questions, and leverage the knowledge that they have. It has been a great pleasure to have you all here. Thank you very, very much. And I hope to see you here next year as well. Just go to our website, www.align.ch, to find out more information about upcoming webinars in the Sharpen of Skills event series. Thank you very, very much. Have a great day.